So we have a new term that we're proposing instead of ADHD. And by the way, before I introduce the new term, even ADHD is not only ugly, it's inaccurate. We don't have a deficit of attention, we who have the condition. We have an abundance of attention. We're overflowing with attention. Our challenge is to control it. If it were a deficit of attention, it would be a form of dementia, which it's not. If anything, it's a form of genius. And the question is, how do you control it? I say it's like you've got a Ferrari engine for a brain. You've got an incredibly powerful brain, but you have bicycle brakes. And so I'm a brake specialist. I help people strengthen their brakes. And as I said, we don't see it as a disorder. We see it as a trait. Now, if you don't manage it right, it can ruin your life. That's absolutely true. It can be horrible. But if you do manage it right, the sky's the limit. And that's what I want people to understand. That's why I'm so passionate about it. I'm 71 years old now. And by the time I die, I want people to wish they had this condition because, I wouldn't trade it for the world. So the new term we've come up with instead of ADHD is VAST, V-A-S-T, and that stands for Variable Attention Stimulus Trait. Variable Attention Stimulus Trait. And the attention and stimulation are the two key elements involved in this condition. We're stimulus seekers. Boredom is our kryptonite. We can't deal with boredom. So we're always seeking stimulation, and sometimes in dangerous ways and sometimes in very adaptive ways. And I'll talk about that. And then attention, again, we hyperfocus and then we lose interest and we go on to something else. So it's hopping around. Variable attention, not a deficit of attention, but variable, changing all the time. So variable attention stimulus trait, VAST. And it's a vast condition. It's a way of being in the world. And if you tell your child or your spouse or yourself, honey, you've got VAST, it sounds like a compliment, and I mean it as a compliment. It is, you have some work to do to turn it into the asset it can be for you. But far from trying to make you normal, we want to help you be super normal. We want to help you be better than average, and that's what this condition properly managed can lead to. Consider using VAST instead of ADHD. And when you explain it to your kids, instead of saying you have a deficit disorder, you can say you've got a race car for a brain with bicycle brakes. And see, and that affords a non-shaming way of intervening. When the kid is being disruptive, you can say, instead of you're a bad boy, you can say your brakes are failing you. There's no shame in that. And he can say, yeah, I got to work on my brakes, because they don't want to be disruptive. They don't want to ruin every party or every dinner. They don't like it when they do that. So if you can explain it to them in a way that they can accept without feeling ashamed, and your brakes are failing you is a way of doing that. So then the challenge is to work on your brakes. I tell people all the time, I don't treat disabilities. I help people unwrap their gifts. And these kids and these adults have tremendous gifts to be unwrapped. I just saw a woman in my office today, 50 years old. And when I explained to her all the talents that she has hidden, she started to cry because she's known all along that she was very talented, but she'd bought into the bad things people had said about her. You need more discipline, you're a ditzy, you don't work hard enough. And she'd sort of accumulated this terrible weight of negative self-image and poor self-esteem. And when I was able to chip away at that and say, no, you've just not been properly diagnosed. You've got this thing that people call ADHD, I call VAST. And if we work on it, you're going to turn into a high-flying superstar, which is what you've known all along you had it in you to become. And that's the good news about this condition. Let me just go over some of the common symptoms that go with it. And so I give you a sense of it, because it's so much more to it than whoops, that's my wife calling me to tell me she's on her way home. She works as a therapist, and she goes to her office in Cambridge, even though she's seeing everyone over Zoom, but she somehow likes the feeling of going to her office. And now she's calling me to tell me she's on her way home. And I forgot to tell her not to call me because I'll be on a call with all of you. So pardon the interruption. But the different ways of being that come into play here, and it varies from every person to every person. The biggest undiagnosed group are adult women, and they so almost invariably, if they go for help, they'll get diagnosed as depressed or anxious or both, and they'll be put on SSRIs, which may help a little bit, but they don't in any way get to the base of the issue. And the very anxiety and depression themselves are caused by the untreated ADD. So if they get the proper treatment for the ADD, the depression and anxiety go away. So anyway, so what are some of the things to look for, whether this is a child or an adult that I'm talking about? Number one, right at the top of the list, unexplained underachievement. Unexplained underachievement. You're not doing as well as your brain power, your upbringing, your DNA would indicate you should. Whether it's a 6-year-old not being able to play with others in school, or not being able to read, or not being able to follow in directions, or not being able to get dressed in the morning or undressed at night, or a 35-year-old man who's running around in circles being told he's the most talented person in the company, but he's about to get fired because he can't, quote unquote, get his act together, be on time, deliver, and he says inappropriate things all the time. And particularly in this day and age, it's really dangerous to say inappropriate things. And then, or if you're the 50-year-old woman who has been, diagnosed depressed and anxious, but she just knows there's more to it than that. So a sense of underachievement, of unexplained underachievement. I say unexplained because sometimes there's an obvious reason that you're not achieving. You're suffering from trauma. You're living in an abusive situation. You're denied access to school, or you're denied access to medical care. So there can be obvious reasons for underachievement. So this is unexplained underachievement. And that's the wonder of this diagnosis, because if someone thinks of it, instead of right away saying it's a discipline problem, or it's a effort problem and needs to try harder, and the person is written off like that, then you're missing such a golden opportunity. So instead, if you can say, let's look at the possibility that it's ADHD, then you can embark on a treatment plan that can absolutely change a life. As I say, no matter what the age, tremendously for the better. So unexplained underachievement, and then a wandering mind. And again, it's not a deficit of attention, it's a wandering of attention. The ADHD mind is driven by curiosity. It goes wherever curiosity leads it. The ADHD mind is like a toddler on a picnic. It goes wherever curiosity leads it, with no regard for danger or authority. So it'll run off into the lake, into the woods, stick its nose in a hornet's nest. It just driven by curiosity, and that's the ADHD mind. So it wanders. So the minute it hits something that's boring, whoop, it's off and running. Not because it doesn't want to pay attention, but because, as I said earlier, boredom is our kryptonite. We just can't tolerate boredom. We repel from boredom. And we're always looking for something stimulating, and that's a lifelong quest. And the trick is to find adaptive methods of getting stimulation as opposed to maladaptive. But that search for stimulation is an ongoing, lifelong search. I'm 71 still, and the reason I write so many books, it's not that I'm ambitious to write books. It's if I don't have a book going, I get depressed. So one of the things we need is a creative outlet. And that should be right at the top of the list in terms of treatment. Find a creative outlet. Again, whether it's you're 6 years old or 36 years old or 66 years old, you need a creative outlet. I often think we're cows that need to be milked. My milking is in the form of writing. Someone else's milking could be in the form of building a business. Someone else's could be building a sandcastle. But it's usually building something, creating something, and finding that creative outlet, getting that milking. And it really came from, I was an English major, so I read Paradise Lost, and John Milton, who wrote Paradise Lost, was blind when he wrote it. So he would compose it in his mind overnight. He was such a genius. He could store the lines up in his mind. And then in the morning, being blind, he called his daughters, and he said, he would say to them, "I need my milking." And they would come running down to him, and they would transcribe as he would dictate the lines of Paradise Lost. It's an amazing story. But I think, again, we need our milking. So the wandering mind, you want to help it wander to places where it can engage creatively. Trouble organizing and planning. That's, sort of the famous one that the ADD way, or the vast way of leaving a house, is you leave 3 times. You have to come back in and get the things you forgot. I freaked myself out yesterday because I got home and I could not find my cell phone. And, me without a cell phone is not a pretty picture. And where did I leave it? Where did I leave it? Where did I leave it? And I once my wife got me to calm down, by the way, marry the right person, very important. Once my wife got me to calm down, I said, "Well, where have you been?" And then it hit me. I had gone to Whole Foods, and while I was at Whole Foods, I had to use the bathroom. And so I went into the bathroom, and I had put my cell phone down on the toilet paper roll. And when I finished going to the bathroom, I had forgotten that I'd left it there. And so thankfully, when I went back to Whole Foods, some nice person had found it, turned it in, and I got my cell phone back. But that's our life. Leaving it can be dangerous if you leave your baby on the roof of your car and drive away, or if you don't see the stop sign and just drive right through it, So we have trouble sweating details. We have trouble focusing on stuff that isn't stimulating, that isn't engaging. And time is particularly difficult for us. In our world, there are basically 2 times. There's now and not now. So if you say the paper is due next Wednesday, not now, and it's just gone. It's just gone. Or someone else, a grid pops up in her brain and she's planning out, when she's going to write on it every day. The ADD person waits until not now, it was almost now. And then in a panic, they get it done. And what happens in a panic is your system puts out a lot of adrenaline. Well, adrenaline is chemically very similar to the stimulant medication we use to treat ADHD or VAST. And so what you're doing unwittingly is you're self-medicating with panic, with crisis. And by the way, that's why so many of us ADDers do well in crises. And the time we spaz out is relaxing on the beach in Aruba. There's not enough stimulation. But that's also why we often are provocative in trying to create arguments, not because we're nasty combative, but because it's more stimulating to argue with mom about why doing math is stupid than to do the math. So we're natural instigators, natural arguers, again, looking for stimulation. But the procrastination is simply because the combination of our sense of time being fundamentally different, and the fact that what we're putting off is almost always not very stimulating. We're avoiding boredom, again, our kryptonite. So the trouble organizing and planning are famous symptoms. High degree of creativity and imagination. And again, this is my observation. It's not proven by the literature, but I can promise you, I've been doing this long enough. I just see it over and over and over again. These kids, these adults have really fertile imaginations, and that can serve them well, or it can be difficult. And when I talk about the default mode network, I'll explain to you why it can be difficult. But when someone tells me they have ADHD, almost always I know they've got a hefty imagination. Strong will We tend to be very strong-willed and stubborn. At the same time, we tend to be incredibly generous. We'll give away the store. Restless and a unique and very active sense of humor. Uh, 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 an exquisite sensitivity to criticism, a tendency to develop what's called rejection sensitivity dysphoria, RSD, and the slightest whiff of rejection or criticism can send someone with ADHD to the basement of self-esteem, and it can be really crippling, this sensitivity to rejection. Impulsive, impatient, we want to make things happen. We shoot from the hip. An ADD romantic conversation goes like this. Okay, so you love me. What's your next point? We can't linger over. Hold on, I just have to turn this off. I don't know why it keeps coming on. That sense of impatience and difficulty lingering can make intimacy difficult. An itch to change the basic inner state, I call the itch at the core of ADD. We want to change our inner state. Ordinary life just doesn't do it for us. So we have to pump up the volume, do something to make it extraordinary. And that can be adaptive, finding a creative outlet, physical exercise, close relationships, or maladaptive. The most obvious example of maladaptive ways of pumping up the volume is addictions, both to substances and to behaviors. Addiction is 8 to 10 times more common in our world. Addiction to alcohol, other illicit drugs, or addiction to shopping, gambling, spending, sex, even exercise. You can take it too far. So there are, as I say, maladaptive and adaptive ways of scratching the itch, of pumping up the volume. I'll just add a couple more. A tendency to externalize and blame others. We have a hard time. We don't observe ourselves very well. And so oftentimes we don't see the role we're playing in a problem. And then finally, all of this sums up to underachievement, which leads to, and then a lot of criticism we get from other people. And so we develop a real negative self-image and a poor sense of self-esteem. Well, that's a quick portrait of what it looks like. Let me tell you one of the things that's new in this book, other than VAST and the concept of it being a trait. I mentioned earlier the default mode network, and this sounds very complicated, but let me explain it to you because it's very important. A lot of people with ADHD are plagued by a tendency to ruminate and brood and have prolonged periods of negative thinking. And what this is all about, and bear with me because it's once you grasp it, it's really, really helpful. When you're doing something, when you're creating something, when you're frying an egg, when you're digging a hole, when you're writing a letter, 3-4 different regions of your brain light up. In aggregate, that's called the task positive network, the TPN. And this is when your imagination is cooking, when you're creating, when you're focused and engaged, and there's structure. Okay, when the egg is fried, when the paper is written, when the letter is done, the TPN, the task positive network, shuts down. And what lights up instead are 4 different regions of the brain. In aggregate, they're called the default mode network, the DMN, which I call the demon, and you'll see why. In people with ADHD, what happens is the imagination that had been serving you so well when it was connected to the TPN, when it's connected to the DMN, it sends out a long stream of negativity. You're awful, life is awful, you suck, nothing's going to work out, you're a loser, just on and on. You're stupid, you're ugly, you're boring, and it just lays it on. And what happens is you sit there transfixed, letting the DMN control you, letting the DMN rule you. And one of the reasons is, you see, we're always looking for stimulation. Well, contentment is too bland. You don't say she was riveted in contentment, but you do say she was riveted in self-hatred, in loathing, in fear, and and so you let the DMN transfix you as it lacerates you up one side and down the other. That is not amenable to insight-oriented psychotherapy. It's not amenable to medication. It's not amenable to anything but the simplest of all interventions ever devised, which is do something else. Get out of the DMN by not feeding it with your attention. Giving it your attention keeps it alive. So my mantra is don't feed the demon. Don't pay attention to this ongoing, relentless stream of negativity, and you keep it alive by paying attention to it. Your attention is its oxygen supply. If you cut that off, it'll die out. So do something else, literally. Dig another hole, call up a friend, turn on the TV, do 25 jumping jacks, anything to engage your mind elsewhere. So the old notion of a cold shower and a run around the block, that actually works. It's puritanical and seems like promoting suffering, but in fact, it's a way to shut off the DMN, to shut down the demon. The worst thing to do is lie there in bed or sit in a chair and just let this onslaught chew you up, which is what it does. It robs you of your natural good feelings about who you are and what your life is. And you can extinguish it by stopping giving it your attention. It's not as easy as it sounds to do, because the DMN is very seductive. It's very seductive. It grabs you, it holds you. You think, now I've perceived the truth. I'm a total loser. Life is totally meaningless. There's no meaning to life. We all just become nothingness after you go on this long negative slog, and it's bad for you. It's bad for the people around you. And it is not bringing you closer to the truth. It's bringing you to a very bad and negative place. So learn, if you can, to do something else to get out of the DMN. And that's one of the really important new insights we put into this book. Another one, and these are along the lines of treatment, in addition to don't feed the demon, is to find your right difficult. Again, I said earlier, we need a creative outlet. We need something that is both challenging and matters to us. And that's what I mean by the right difficult. It's got to be difficult or challenging, or we'll get bored with it. So finding the right difficult, it means finding some kind of activity that that matters to you, that engages you. And the fact that it's difficult is good, because that'll hold your attention. We want difficult. It's just got to be the right difficult. In my own case, my right difficult is writing. And believe me, it's difficult, but it matters a lot to me. And another right difficult earlier in my life was as an English major, tackling pre-med and getting into medical school. That at first seemed like a very tall order, and people were saying, "Why are you doing that? Why don't you go be an English teacher instead?" And I said, "No, I want to get into the meat of life." And I thought medicine would be a way of doing that. But it was going against my grain, for an English major to get into medical school. So that was the right difficult for me years ago. And so again, you don't want you don't want to tackle the wrong difficult. And that's a trap people with ADD often fall into, because they spend a lifetime trying to get good at what they're bad at. And it's just not going to happen. I could try as long as I want to. I'll never get good at dunking a basketball. And if I had my self-esteem rest on that, I'd be in trouble. You can also get into the trap of falling in love with the wrong person and then continuing to pursue that in very self-defeating ways. It's another thing we ADDers can do. We can we can fall for people who are really not good for us, and we turn it into a project like we're going to conquer that. And rarely does it work out. So don't fall in thrall of the wrong difficult, but do fall in thrall of the right difficult. It's tremendously important. Another element that we stress in the book is the role of the cerebellum. Now, this is all brand new neuroscience brought to us from Jeremy Schmahmann at Mass General Hospital and Harvard Medical School. And he, the cerebellum, when I was in medical school, is this region at the base and back of your brain. It only has about 10% of brain volume, but it has 70% of the neurons in your brain. So it's really packed. And we were taught when I was a medical student that it just regulated balance and coordination. Well, Schmahmann has shown that in fact, it's way more important than that, and that it's very richly connected to the frontal lobes, which is where the action is in ADHD. And if you stimulate the cerebellum, you can actually bring about improvement in the symptoms of ADHD. Now, how do you stimulate the cerebellum? By doing exercises that challenge balance and coordination. So like standing on a wobble board, or standing on one leg, or standing on one leg with your eyes closed. Anything that challenges balance and coordination will stimulate your cerebellum. Even something as simple as when you get dressed in the morning and undressed at night, don't sit down. So putting on and off your underwear, putting on and off your socks or pantyhose or whatever, don't sit down. That's quite a balancing act. So do it near your bed. So if you fall, you can fall into your bed. But a program of cerebellar stimulation is becoming a really good way of improving the symptoms of both dyslexia and ADHD. There's a man in England named Winford Dorr who's put together a whole program of graduated exercises. And if you want to learn about that, go to a website. It's called distraction.zingperformance, Z as in zebra.com. So distraction.zingperformance.com. Or just read about it in my new book, ADHD 2.0. Well, those are some of the highlights. I want to have time for your questions. And but mainly I want to impress upon you the wonderful outcomes that are possible with ADHD. Finding the right difficult, having a creative outlet. Physical exercise is another tremendously important method of bringing about improvement. For adults, obviously, marry the right person, find the right job, or mate with the right person. I don't mean you have to get married, but pair up with the right person and find the right job. And ADDers often make big mistakes in both of those domains. And it's very hard to, achieve what you want in life if you're with the wrong person or in the wrong line of work. And then, of course, medication is, the topic that in the chapter we call it the most powerful tool everyone fears, because people are unjustly afraid of medication. Yes, meds can be dangerous if they're used improperly, but if they're used properly, they're a positive godsend. I mean, nothing works as fast and as dramatically as medication. Now, long-term, you need creative outlet, human connection. I didn't mention that but we have a whole chapter on the power of connection, the power of, and boy, have we ever learned about how horrible it is to be denied connection during COVID. But we've found other ways of connecting. But medication, when it's used properly, is very safe, very effective. It helps about 80% of the time. 20% of the time it doesn't work or causes side effects that you can't deal with. In my own case, medication doesn't work. I shouldn't say that because caffeine does work. So coffee is my medication. But for most people, prescription medication, you can find a dose of a medication that provides target symptom improvement with no side effects other than appetite suppression without unwanted weight loss. Well, let me pause there and answer some of your questions. Sharon, do you want to read some to me, or do you want me to go down here and look for them?
Yes, Chantil is going to turn her mic on and she's going to read the questions for you.
Okay.
Yep. Just a second.
All right, Dr. Hallowell, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. All right, so we have a question from Diane who asked, can you develop ADHD later in life and where can you get diagnosed?
She said I was closing the door. What was the question again?
Can you develop ADHD later in life and where can you get diagnosed?
Oh, absolutely, you can, and often it happens when around some life event where organizational demands increase dramatically, like having your first child, or starting medical school, or moving to a job where you have to use executive function more than you ever had to before. Or it can be something simply not knowing about it, and say you read one of my books and you say, wow, that sounds like me. And finally you go and get diagnosed. Where to get help? Well, I can hardly say anything but come to see me, and, but fortunately I'm not the only game in town, but I am, I do have a very active clinic in Sudbury, modestly named the Hallowell Center. And, we're always ready to see you. And I still see patients every day over Zoom, but I'm starting to see some actually in person. And then we live in an area where there are lots of good practitioners. Mass General Hospital is one of the world's leading research centers for ADHD, and Joe Biederman and Tim Willens and Tom Spencer are absolute masters. And so you can go there, but all the teaching hospitals have, the ones that have departments of child psychiatry have expertise in ADHD and as well as adult ADHD. So come see me or go to one of the teaching hospitals. And by the way, in addition to my book, I've started posting on TikTok, and I have about 40 or 50 60-second video clips, educational video clips on different aspects of ADHD. And in the past 3 months or so, they've received over 4 million views. It's amazing how it's taken off. And if you think about it, it makes sense, because that short format fits the ADD. We don't like it long, we like it short. So and that the TikTok response has been pretty amazing. So you can go to TikTok, go to my books, go to Come See Me, or go to one of the many, unlike most places in the country where it's extremely hard to find anyone who knows anything about this condition. The Boston area, fortunately, we're blessed to have many people who do. And so you don't have to look far.
All right, wonderful, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So our next question is from Bonnie. She asks, if it's a trait, will it still be a special education diagnosis so that kids in school can get helpful accommodations?
Oh, that's a very good point. And it's why Russ Barkley, whom I admire and love dearly, wonderful researcher in the field, says, Ned, will you please stop talking about this as a trait and about the advantages, because we're never going to get research funding for an advantage. And we're not going to get special help in school for kids who are gifted, So yes, we need to hold on to the deficit model in terms of getting research funding and getting help for kids. My main point in trying to change the wording is not to deny services, but to help people not feel ashamed of it. But yes, we do need to retain that pathology model in order to qualify for help. That's a very good question. I'm glad you asked that.
Okay, our next question is from James. James asks, what is the relationship between ADHD and tolerance or lack of boredom?
Lack of tolerance for boredom. Yeah, we don't do boredom. We can't do boredom. It just, we have to make something happen. That's often when we get into trouble. But it's often when new ideas come to us. We get bored and bingo, a new idea happens. One of the hallmark symptoms of ADD is impulsivity. But you turn that on its head, what do you get? What is creativity but impulsivity gone right? You don't plan to have a creative thought. You don't say it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, time for my creative idea. And summon it up. No, creativity happens impulsively, disinhibitedly, bad breaks, spontaneous. So some of our bad deeds we do impulsively, but some of our greatest moments occur when we have this creative idea, and they pop. They don't come planned. They pop out of our unconscious, and so that's the positive side of impulsivity is creativity.
All right, so we actually have a really nice comment from Barbara here. She says, my heart is so overjoyed hearing all of this. And then she has a question, would you say that many more people have VAS than are actually diagnosed?
Yes, I do think so. And some people lament the overdiagnosis of the condition, and that can be, there are some areas, some neighborhoods where parents, angle to get their kids diagnosed because they think they'll get a leg up. I think that's way less common. The press likes to play that up because they always want to play up, manipulative, nasty people. But I think in my experience, most parents are in fact not like that. And so I do think, particularly in adults, it's underdiagnosed, and adult women particularly, but men too. Men don't want to say there's anything wrong. And I tell them, look, it's something that's very right, but you could be doing even better if you got this diagnosis. So I think, for the reasons I said earlier about stigma and ignorance, it is underdiagnosed, particularly in successful people, particularly in kids who are getting good grades or adults who are doing well in their careers. You say, well, there's nothing wrong. Well, that's true. But I'll never forget, I have a patient in my New York practice who's a self-made billionaire. And one day he said to me, think what I could have done had I had this diagnosis sooner. I said to him, well, you haven't done too badly. But his point was, getting the diagnosis, even though he was fabulously successful by any standard, getting the diagnosis and the treatment made life so much easier for him. The analogy is like getting eyeglasses when you're nearsighted. He'd been getting by squinting. And now when he got eyeglasses in the form of learning about the condition and medication, he was able to do so much more, with so much less effort and pain and frustration. Marriage improved, his work improved. And so particularly with people who are achieving and at a high level, and whether it be a student or an adult, rarely do they get diagnosed. And you shouldn't have to fail in order to get diagnosed. You should be able to get diagnosed no matter what your level of achievement is.
Great, thank you. Okay, our next question is from Heather. This is also a question I have personally too. Do you distinguish between ADHD and ADD?
Yeah, that is a common question, and it's really the fault of the people who made up the terms. The fact is, when I learned about this condition in 1981, when I was a fellow in child psychiatry, it was called attention deficit disorder, ADD. Then in the 90s, they stuck the H in, and it became ADHD. And the fact is, technically, there is no ADD anymore. If you have the condition, it's called ADHD. And if you have it without the symptom of hyperactivity, it's called ADHD primarily inattentive. And if you have the symptom of hyperactivity, it's called ADHD combined type. You have inattention plus hyperactivity. Unnecessarily confusing, but it's just that simple. It's ADHD with or without the H. Now, I don't know why they don't call it ADD and ADHD. That was too simple. They had to make it complicated for us, so, but lots of people who don't get diagnosed have ADHD primarily inattentive, and it's because they're not disruptive. They don't cause anybody any problem, whether it's a student in school or an adult in the workplace. They're lost in their thoughts, in their dreams, but because they're not causing any trouble, they don't get diagnosed. So the biggest undiagnosed group are the ADHD primarily inattentive.
All right, so I know it's 8 o'clock, but since we got started a little late, do you mind taking a few more questions?
Sure, sure.
Thank you. All right, so let's see. Our next one is from from Sue. Sue is curious if Donald Trump had ADD. Not for an opinion for that.
Well, you know, we are not supposed to diagnose famous people, so I'll pass on that question. But I can tell you there's a lot more going on than ADHD. I can at least say that.
Fair enough. All right. Next question from Bonnie is, she's asking if you can talk about the benefits of medication or how medication would work together with other strategies.
Well, first of all, medication should never be the entire treatment. Education should always be part of the program. Learning about this, owning it, celebrating it, understanding your ADD. So education should always be part of it, and coaching in one form or another should always be part of it. Learning how to reorganize your life and make the right choices, the right plans, the right methods, so you don't forget your cell phone in a Whole Foods restroom. You know, so you need coaching. But in that context, medication can be an absolute godsend. It can be as dramatic as eyeglasses. And you can all of a sudden, it makes all the other interventions that much more effective. So medication combined with other interventions is very helpful. Was that the whole question?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay.
Okay. So this next question is from Deb. This is about specifically her son who is struggling with virtual school.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just read this out. It looks like her son is on 6 hours of Zoom calls per day, which is hard for a 12-year-old with ADHD. Do you have any ideas on how to help? He is exercising before and after school, which helps, but she's curious about other ideas.
Bring COVID to an end and let's go back to classrooms. I mean, you know, it's just a terrible thing. For even if you don't have ADHD, there's something called Zoom fatigue, and it's a very real phenomenon. It's just way more mentally draining to be on Zoom than in person. And, you know, we all can't wait for this pandemic to be over so we can go back to, you know, being with each other in person. In the meantime, I would do what you're doing. First of all, tell him a lot of people are suffering the way he is. So don't make him feel that there's something wrong with him. There's something wrong with, you know, expecting education online to work. It doesn't. It's, you know, we've got to have something. So it's the best thing we've come up with. But honestly, I think this would have been an ideal time to do project-based learning and forget about the classroom. You know, send them out to start a little business, or send them out to, you know, explore the swamp, and you know, or send them out to build a go-kart, or, you know, project-based learning would have been perfect. Just, you know, get rid of the educational requirements that, you know, that lead to some tests that you're going to take, and instead do projects. And honestly, it's a better way of learning in general, I think. You know, my life was changed in 12th grade because I wrote a novel, and that was a project, you know, that we were allowed to do projects, and my project was to write a novel, and changed my life forever. Not only did it turn me into a writer, but it got me to prove to myself I could do something I would have thought was impossible. If you told me at start of 12th grade I was going to write a novel, I would have said, sure, and I'll fly to the moon in my spare time. But with the help of a wonderful teacher named Fred Tremallow, I produced a novel, and it won the senior English prize, and it mainly got me to prove to myself that I could do something that I thought was impossible. And once you've done that, you keep trying to do it. Ever since, I've been trying to do things that are impossible, usually failing, but always wanting to try it again. You know, and so that's what I call the love of the game of life. And you know, I'm just so grateful to be alive. I'm so grateful to be able to try impossible stuff, you know, and it's not the success or failure that's the measure. It's, do I still love the game? And I do. And the failing is to be expected. You know, it's part of tackling anything that's difficult. But I have this enormous sense of gratitude to be able to be alive and ply my brain and try my best. And I've been lucky because I've been, given some knowledge that I've been able to use to help other people, and that's the greatest feeling in the world. But to be able to use your brain, it's much more liberating if you're working on a project than if you're memorizing verbs or preparing for some test. I'm not saying take your kid out of school or anything like that. I'm just saying I can't wait for us to get back to an education that kids can enjoy, because what's going on now is just I guess a necessary evil, but I don't think it's necessary, because I think a project-based learning would be much better for kids to have these days. But I'm not in charge of the system, so.
Great. I'm sure that was a great answer for any parents or caregivers who are watching with kids in school right now. Well, let's see. I missed a question here from James Arbo. James is asking, is emotional regulation a struggle for those with ADHD? And I hope I don't butcher this medication name, but he's asking, does medication like guanfacine help with that? If that's familiar to you.
Yeah, you pronounced it perfectly. It's called guanfacine. And yes, it can help. And yes, emotional regulation is a challenge for us. I can be very reactive. I can snap at people and I feel bad about it. And I try to control it, but it's part of the race car brain with bicycle brakes. And sometimes my brakes fail me. I've gotten very good at apologizing, which is something that I necessarily have had to learn how to do. But yeah, it's part of the downside of this condition is emotional reactivity. And I wouldn't say instability, but we're not the sort of steady Eddie, even-tempered kind of people that some people are.
So our next question is from Kathy. Kathy is asking, is ADHD related to any brain diseases of the elderly, such as dementia?
No, it's not. They're separate entities.
Okay. And then another question related to maybe the aging population is, how does VAST change as you age?
Well, if you get the right kind of help, it ripens and improves. See, once you're doing the right stuff, you found the right difficult, you've found the right projects, you're exercising, it ripens, and I've been enjoying my life tremendously at age 71, and there are still things that annoy the hell out of me. I hate sweating details and dealing with bureaucracies, but I'm absolutely looking forward to writing my next book, and absolutely, learning how to do TikTok videos and, taking on new challenges, and loving friendship and my 3 children and my wife. So, it can improve with age. It does not in any way have to deteriorate with age. Other things deteriorate. I have 2 artificial hips and I no longer have a prostate, but my brain seems to be perking along pretty well. Thanks.
Okay. All right, so we're just going to take 2 more questions and then we'll wrap up this event.
Okay.
So Annie asks, what material can you recommend for kids to learn about this themselves? I struggle to explain my daughter's ADHD to her. Now I'll call it VAST, but she could benefit from reading about it as well.
Yeah, once you understand it, put it in your own words. The race car brain with bicycle brakes is a good one. But some people who are more inattentive don't identify with that as much. I sometimes use the metaphor of a butterfly and trying to entice a butterfly to come in for a landing. Whatever metaphor you want to use. Another metaphor I use is Niagara Falls. Having ADHD is like Niagara Falls. Until you build a hydroelectric plant, it's just a lot of noise and mist. But once you build a hydroelectric plant, you can light up the state of New York. And that's really what trying to learn how to harness the power of this condition is all about. And so if your daughter could understand that, use those analogies, and that she's basically got a gift that takes some work to unwrap, and that'll take some time. For little kids, I wrote a book for my own daughter, who's now 31, when she was about 6, called A Walk in the Rain with a Brain. And the last 3 lines of it are the epigram to this new book. The last 3 lines are: no brain is the same, no brain is the best. Each brain finds its own special way. And that's important for kids to grow up knowing that, just that, no brain is the same, no brain is the best. Each brain finds its own special way. And that's what education should be about: finding your brain's special way, not just around a classroom, but around life, around nature, around other people, around disappointment, around, and what's your brain's special way? Was it a great line I read today? Someone said, when you write the story of your life, don't let anyone else hold the pen. So be yourself, and then hang around people who are supporters. Stay away from the negative folks. Now, some negative people are fun. The curmudgeonly pessimist, they're fun. So you don't have to stay away from them, but just stay away from people who are nasty. People who are just mean, angry, mean. Don't let them infect you with their negativity, because that there's nothing good about it.
That is definitely evergreen advice. Thank you. All right. So our final question for the evening is from Melissa. Melissa says, I work with adults with ADHD as a therapist, and I find that teaching the skill of empathy is really helpful. Is this something that makes sense to you?
Oh, total sense. And learning empathy. Now, it's something that, again, with ADD, there's always 2 sides. We can seem as if we're completely lacking in empathy, and that's why we often get called narcissistic, passive aggressive, self-centered. But it's not that. We're in our own little world, and we need to learn the basics of how to focus on the other person. And you can do that. You make eye contact, don't interrupt, make a point of listening, repeat back. There are ways of learning empathy. It's sort of like learning politeness. There are rules you can follow. Now, for some people, it comes naturally. And a lot of us with ADD, myself included, we're too empathic. We tune in way too quickly and way too easily. It can really hurt us to feel the pain that the world is bursting with, so sometimes you want to take some lessons in anti-empathy, and learning how not to tune in, learning how to compartmentalize and tune out. So again, paradoxical pairs. We can be super empathic on the one hand, and we can be totally not on the other hand. But yes, I think teaching it is, and teaching it also means learning how to control it, learning how not to get swallowed up by someone else's problems. Put on the mask on yourself first, kind of thing. Well, I hope this has worked out for you all. I'm sorry. And as I said at the beginning, the women in charge of this event are my heroes. They are living proof of resiliency and grace under pressure. And I just loved watching the fire brigade in action when the building was burning down before we started. And you all put out the fire, and we managed to put on a show together.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hallowell. Can not thank you enough. This was better than we could have possibly expected, and we expected a lot. So we really, really appreciate this.
Thank you, Sharon. Take care, you guys.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone. In case anyone's still on, we will put the link to this event on our website.
Thank you guys for organizing this.
Thank you for attending.